because sound is everything. Sound is it's our personality, it's our signature. That's why so many bass players get hired. So we need to protect that. So it goes through phases where I spend too much time trying a lot of different things, or we could say just enough time trying to find the perfect sound. And then I get to a point where I say, okay, I'm tired of carrying all this extra gear with me to gigs. I'm just going to stick with one pickup and use that. And whatever amp is available to me, I'm going to use that and not carry anything. I've worked in and out of studios starting since I was 15. I worked in a studio for a while and have been recording nonstop. I work in a studio again, actually run a studio. And in that time, I've also tried lots of different pickups and microphone combinations. So I spent enough time to try and figure out what works for me. But also spend enough time so I can go into a situation where I'm not playing my bass and I'm not playing my amp and I'm not playing my pickup in a room I've never been in before. And I can usually dial in my sound pretty close to how I want it. So yeah, it's always a journey though. There's always a process of trying to discover something new and then figure out if it fits with your vision for sound. So it's like trying new things and then saying, okay, actually it was fine before, or, oh yeah, this is cool and this is going to bring me to new ideas or take me somewhere new in my sound I hadn't thought about before. Yeah, the double bass is very hard to amplify, and now we're at a point where we're getting a lot more options, which is really a wonderful thing to be able to explore. I believe there has to be some technical know-how or some technical awareness on the side of the musician to understand how these things can really help take their sound to the next level. If you hear something that you don't like but you don't know how to communicate it, then that can be problematic. And we all know as musicians, if you're in a situation where your sound is not really happening or it's not what you expect, just the psychology of that. You play something and then the sound you get in the room is entirely different than what you're used to. That can create a really uncomfortable or even bad sounding performance in your mind because you don't know how to change that or make the best of it. So yeah, having the awareness of how to amplify the double bass, having a little bit of technical information can really save you in a lot of situations. What we hear when we're playing live versus what we hear in the studio can be two very different experiences. And often as bass players, we don't get a lot of time to really discover what those differences are and how they can affect the way that we play. We found that there are a lot of options for bass players, lots of ways that you can go. The differences between pickups, for example, there are a lot of choices. The piezo pickups all have a certain characteristic. For example, the Wilson pickups, they offer a completely different aesthetic of sound, and then even the microphones, DPA versus the Neumann, and so on, they all offer slight advantages or honestly disadvantages depending on what your preferred sound is. They all accomplish the goal of communicating your sound and your ideas, but for the bass player who's working a lot or has an idea of what their sound is, really diving into this gear and participating in what we're doing, where we're recording these samples and presenting it to different musicians, different listeners, can really help take their ideas and their sound to the next level because they can find something that really suits what they're doing. But yeah, what happens, at least in my experience, is that, and I'll preface this by saying I am in no way insulting sound engineers universally. I am one, and I respect what they do. But often there's a misunderstanding that the double bass is just a large bass drum with strings, or that a double bass is just an electric bass, but even bigger. And so the sound, when you work with someone who thinks what I just talked about, you get a bass that has a lot of extra low end and it's going through a subwoofer, or you get a bass that sounds really nasally, kind of like a bass guitar, and it doesn't preserve the acoustic properties of the instrument. So there are certain frequencies that we have to be aware of, and there are certain things that are misleading, mainly that when you amplify a bass, you want to turn the bass all the way up on the bass amp, and that you don't need any mid-range, and there are a lot of misnomers or things that are misunderstood about that. Again, for what we're doing with Chain of Sounds, to try and offer people the opportunity to understand more about how their sound is being shaped, and give them the knowledge or the curiosity to go out there and take more control over their sound. Well, I remember when I was younger and I was trying to figure out what the bass sounded like, I used to practice in my bathroom, and I used to turn the lights off, so I couldn't actually like look at myself when I was playing. I just had to hear the sound bouncing back and recognize what the sound of the instrument was for 99.9% of the people who listen to it. And that's always a bit of a funny situation when you play and you realize you're the only person who hears the instrument the way that you do. So like the little bit of buzz underneath the fingers against your left ear, or the way that it resonates against your body. I remember talking to the great bassist Marco Panacea. I heard him in New York, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I went to one of his gigs, and he was playing, I think it was the Fishman Full Circle through a Gallion-Kruger combo amp. And when I heard him out in the audience, it was one of the most beautiful amplified bass tones that I had heard live. And he invited me to sit in. He was very gracious. And when I got up on stage, the sound of the amp was really trebly, like very, very high on treble. And I played, and I asked him, I said, it sounds really trebly on stage. And he said, yeah, I know. He's like, but when you listen out in the audience, it's the right balance. And he was totally correct. So it's how to amplify the instrument so that people in the audience can hear it and it sounds good to them. And that's also a different perspective, or a different mindset shift that you have to make in the process of discovering and recreating your sound. It's just another situation. Changing your sound to fit the situation, whether it's an instrument or even a technique that we use to play, that's so important for being able to recreate the vision that we have in our ears or our mind for the music. So if I can't change my bass, on a gig, maybe I can articulate in a way that produces more mid-range. Or if I'm in the studio, I know that I don't have to play as hard or play as dynamically as I would in a live situation, because it's in a controlled environment. So I can have even more control over my sound. Or even in the studio, I can find the right microphone, or the right combination of pickup and microphone, or even the right distance of microphone away from the instrument to capture that sound. There's endless opportunities for what you can do to manipulate that. But ultimately, every choice that we make, or every choice that's available to us, is just a step that we can take to get closer to the sound that we imagine in our head. Sometimes you have to use equipment to understand what possibilities there are. And then once you get to a certain point of understanding and awareness, you start to understand what the sound is and what equipment is appropriate to help you get there. It's like one thing feeds the other, but that's a never-ending process. It's always evolving for me. I'm sure it's always evolving for you, and obviously everyone who's interested in chain of sounds and what what is being done to provide options to learn about these different choices. That's another step in building awareness and creating educational opportunities and conversation around sound. Yeah, I think what is being done here is so helpful for bassists. There's not much or anything that I know of that's doing this exact project. So here's to creating a world of bass players with a really killer sound.